Welcome back. So now we can actually log in and log out. That's perfect, but it would also be nice if we were actually able to create new users, and that's what we're going to focus on in the next lessons. So what we're going to start doing is just creating in the Auth controller a new endpoint where we can go and create new users from our front end. And I'm actually going to use two areas right here. I'm going to use the security service and the AuthUser service in this setup right here. And this lesson we're just going to focus on the security service first. I already prepared in the interface a new method called generate new auth user right here, where you just pass in a username. You can make this more complex, you can make it simpler. I'm just going to say if you want to generate a new user, you're just going to pass a username for that new user, and I'll automatically generate just the default password for you, and then I'll ask you to reset the password later. And for now, the default password will just be a string I choose. That could be auto-generated, that could be hashed, that could be, you could do a lot of things to that auto-generated password, but the idea is as soon as the user is created, he'll get a mail being asked to reset the password right away. That's at least the general idea, but let's figure out how we can do it later on. For now, let's just at least be able to create a new user. Now the way to do this is we're going to make a default password. This is in the implementation class for the security service. I just made this method again because I added it in the interface now. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to again say, first, make a default password, then make a new salt we can use to kind of hash the password. So generate the hashed password right here. I should probably say hashed. There we go. Create the auth user with the new hashed password and the salt, and pass that onto the auth user service right here. When it's created, then actually go and say return that saved user. That's kind of the goals for this lesson right here. Let's just jump into the browser and see if we can get a little help. I opened up the hash password right here. There's a link in the description. And the way we can do it is actually we can start by just creating some kind of salt right here. And this is a way to generate a salt. So I'm just going to take that and just put that in here. And now I actually have a salt generated. I'll put in, instead of the byte array here, I'll just put in salt with a var. And the using keyword, let's say what it says about that one. I can convert it into a using declaration instead. If you're into that, if you want the using keyword, just keep that. So the next thing I want to do is just make a default password right here. Default password, and I just want to make that equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for now. Again, there's a lot of improvement if you want to make it even more secure. Instead of using a default password, there's other ways to kind of do this, but I'm just going to keep this as the default password. And there we go. Now we actually have a salt and a default password, so we can actually generate the hash. So these two are done. Let's just move them above these so you can see them. We want to make a default password, we want to make a new salt, and now we can generate a hashed value right here. And how can we do that? Well, we can just call the local hash password right here, and we can pass in the default password, and we can pass in the salt we just created. There we go. And now we actually have a hashed password right here. Hashed password. There we go. Equals. So now we have the generated password. What else can we do? Well, we also want to kind of create our new auth user right here, and we don't have a method for that yet. So let's see if we have something in the auth service that can help us. Notice there's no create user yet, so let's just call create. Let's just call it create, nothing else. And here I want to pass in a new, and I want to pass in an auth user. So I'm going to create this new auth user right here, and let's just put in a couple of curly brackets. I don't want to give it an ID, but I want to give it the hashed password I just created. And he also needs to get the salt. So I'll also pass in the salt right here. And let's just call it salt. There we go. So now we have all this available. I don't need anything else. Of course, I should also add the username so we know who the user actually is. Right here, that's the username that I'm getting from the outside. There we go. So now we've created a new user. And I also want to return an auth user actually. And right now, instead of war, I'm going to actually add auth user like this, because that means that now it'll automatically, when I generate the create function, also know it needs to return an auth user like this. So now we need to we have the auth user created, and we actually also have it passed to the service, and then hopefully we're going to get an auth user back, and then we'll just return that auth user, and we're kind of done for this part right here. That's how simple it was. But we're not quite there yet, because we need to go to the auth service now and create this new method. So let's just go there, create the new auth user. So now we have the create in our auth user interface right here, the service interface. Let's go down to the auth user service itself and implement the missing member. And here, of course, we need to kind of do a return statement from the auth user repository. And then let's call it save instead of create in the repository to kind of show we're saving this to a database. You can call it anything you want. And then I'll just pass in the auth user itself. And let's just go to that create save method down here in the auth user. There we go. And now in the auth user repository, we've implemented this, but we need to go down into the implementation class and implement it there as well by calling a couple of methods. There we go. And the first thing we want to do is just say, dear context, I want to add something. So we'll say context add like this, add, and there I want to add an AuthUser entity, right? So the AuthUser entity right here, like this, and then we'll go down and we'll create a couple of things we need. We need a hashed password. Well, we are getting that from the AuthUser, hopefully. So there we go. We need to get the salt. We're getting that from the AuthUser, hopefully. So let's just say AuthUser.salt. And then the final thing I want to save is going to be the username. So let's get the AuthUser username. Now the salt is going to give me an error right here. The reason is, of course, that the salt needs to be kind of wrapped like this. So we need to encode it. And there's actually in the encoding, there's also a get string right here to kind of encode from an array to a byte array. From a byte array to a string like this. Now there's also another way to do it. If you look at the guide, they're actually using convert to base 64 string. We could also do that and then kind of do the other thing when we're reading the code back. But right now I'm using get bytes, so I also use get string like this. One more thing I want to do is I want to save the actual entity that's going to be created by this. So the actual entity itself, the AuthUser entity, you can get that back from a save by calling .entity like this. And I'll just make a local reference right here. So I'll say var, and I'll say entity like this is going to be equal to that local entity. So now this AuthUser entity is what's going to be returned. And the only difference is it's going to have an ID here, where it's not going to have an ID when we save it to the database. So now with this in place, what I want to do next is I want to save the context. So I'll do save changes like this. And then the final thing to do is to return a new AuthUser that has the information that I want. And in my case, all I need right now is just going to be the username that I'm getting from that entity up there, entity of the username, and then the password. Now, all this conversion back and forth, is that necessary? And the answer is, you can do it differently, but the cool thing with this is you always know what you have. You always can control exactly what's going to come back from your database. So I really like it, but it's really up to you how you want to kind of handle this. So now it seems the save method is working. So let's just have a quick overview about what we actually did in this lesson before we next lesson start building the endpoint that we want to build. So first of all, we started in the security service, and there we actually made a way for us to generate a new authentication user by adding a username only. And then we'll create a default password for now, and we'll create a random salt. With that random salt and default password, we'll create a hashed password. And with that hashed password, we can now generate an auth user that has the username, the hashed password, and the salt, and we'll send that auth user to the auth user service. He knows how to create it in the database.